Okay, I'm just going to have one more session with a couple of points, and then the rest will be up to you to continue with your own reading and reflection over, over hopefully the next few days. Through this interview, to try to somewhat get into the spirit, in fact, maybe inside the skin of Pope Francis. I did send you some links for videos, analyses of his papacy, especially after a year. Lots of folks are commenting on it. There's a lot of good stuff there. It may have been a bit overwhelming, but I would like to suggest that you go back to that message, and over the course of whatever time you have, to get into some of those videos. At very least, get into the marvelous one that Susan made of a 2-minute kind of entering into his quotations in a very vivid pictorial way, which I think was very, very beautifully done. One of the things with regard to the astuteness of his governance of the church is that he is somebody who acknowledges that he makes mistakes and that he has learned from mistakes. If you were paying attention to the news after he was first elected, he came in for some criticism because of some decisions that he made back when he was in his late 30s, early 40s as a Jesuit superior in what was very, very difficult times, both for Argentina and for the church and for the Jesuits there. And he freely admits that he learned a lot and made some wrong decisions there. What's interesting in our political spectrum here, on all sides of the political spectrum, is nobody is allowed to have made a wrong decision in the past. What that means is they, whoever they might be, jumps on you for it, and you have to defend it rather than say, I've learned from it. Nobody seems to give much tolerance to learning from trial and error, even in important things. And yet, that is what we all must do. The lesson that he learned, as he says here, is he was very kind, gentle, and all of that, but also very authoritarian, and did not consult before making sometimes rash decisions. And that, I think, is one reason why, when it became clear that the cardinals were going in the direction of electing him, he was probably spending a good bit of those last hours of the conclave, when it was obvious that he would be confronted with a decision to say yes, probably looking around and saying, okay, who are the ones that I need to consult with? And he's done a good job of that, I think, in setting up that group of 8 cardinals throughout the world to, from a worldwide perspective, to address the issues of reform for the Curia, for the Vatican bureaucracy. That's a slow process. He is making friends in it, and he is making enemies. And it's going to be very interesting, as that process continues, how his friends and how his enemies are going to continue to relate to this. one terribly interesting thing, I think, in the section on page 5 that says thinking with the church. Mary is his model, the fourth paragraph down. This is how it is with Mary. Thinking with the church does not concern theologians only. If you want to know who Mary is, ask the theologians. If you want to know how to love her, you have to ask the people. In turn, Mary loved Jesus with the heart of the people. As we read in the Magnificat, her song of praise upon her discovering that she is to be the Mother of God. And the infallibility of the church sometimes is put in an either-or. You know, the Pope is infallible, the people are infallible. And it has to be the relationship, the healthy relationship of a both and. The entire church, along with its leaders, seeks and strives for unanimity. Now, unanimity is a very interesting word because unanimity means oneness of spirit. It's not just agreeing on a statement or agreeing on a vote or something like that. It is oneness of spirit. And I think the point that he is making in his way of handling leadership is to seek unanimity, to seek the kind of collaboration between leaders and people that produces what sometimes we crassly call buy-in. But you see, what buy-in is somebody speaks and someone else listens and does what the boss says. I buy into it. What authentic listening is that we pay attention. We are attentive to one another. Whatever our roles and responsibilities are, we have to be attentive to one another. Attentiveness is always, always, always a two-way street. So, God's people, the infallibility of faith, of belief, which always is not limited just to doctrinal expressions. That's one of the other mistakes a lot of people make. You know, infallibility does not reside in a doctrinal statement, which is always going to be expressed in fallible human words and fallible human concepts. So infallibility is really much more a seeking of unanimity among the believing people, theologians, bishops, faithful, all together. And that, I think, is very, very much his guiding principle. The last thing I'm going to talk about is this marvelous image that came up in that interview of what is the church? And what kind of church do you dream of? And he says, I see clearly the thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and warm the hearts of the faithful. It needs nearness. This is on page 6, the fourth paragraph down. It needs nearness, proximity. I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has high cholesterol and about the level of his blood sugar. You have to heal his wounds. Then we can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds. And you have to start from the ground up. So that's not to ignore the blood pressure issues and the cholesterol issues, but it is to say, put those in the perspective of the deepest healing that is needed. I think that that famous "who am I to judge" statement, which has been properly understood but not within context. Because he's not saying that everything is okay, whatever you want to do, go ahead, who am I to judge? No. What he is saying is, if you are seeking first the relationship with Jesus and to live as his follower, who am I to judge? So, who am I to judge particulars of your life? So I think, for example, a person who is struggling with, okay, let's use that example, sexual identity, and how responsibly to deal with it. Do you say, you've got to straighten out first, and then you can be loved by Jesus? Or do you concentrate on Jesus loves you? Now, let's together work on what is your responsible response. And our responses are always going to be imperfect. And so how do we heal? We first of all recognize, going back to the beginning, we are fellow sinners. And I think I can speak with you with much more, credibility, but I think also with much more genuine effectiveness if we approach sinfulness as fellow sinners, rather than as judgment from on high. So, how do we, as fellow sinners, discern the work of God through Jesus in our midst? That, I think, is it's sort of coming back to the beginning of what we were talking about. As to the rest, I really like, some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I really like on page 9, that question of optimism. I have to say, the more I walk around with my eyes open and my ears listening, the less reason I find in our world today for optimism. As I look back at history, one of the things that I see is very rarely, if ever, has humankind missed the opportunity to screw things up badly. Rarely have our attempts to make things better actually succeeded in anything other than little tiny corners and slivers of reality of our world, while everything else seems to get worse. Rarely have our attempts to fix things or to solve problems had any real lasting effect without having side effects that sometimes are fatal. The treatment succeeded because it killed the patient. That kind of thing. I have very little reason for optimism, but a lot of reason for hope. And I think that's why this image of Mary, the untier of knots, the instrument of God, who actually can bring about healing and wholeness if we let God work through God's instruments, and if we let God make us His instruments, rather than having to do it our way and asking God to help us to do it our way. So we're back also on that word discernment. How do we as individuals and as communities engage in a process of discernment as to how does God want to use us as instruments? So relying on God is not a passive thing. It is an active thing. But it's not deciding what's best and then plowing ahead and doing it and expecting God to support us. We do have to make decisions about what is best. We do have to make decisions about this course of action or that course of action. Some of those decisions need to be bold ones. Some of those decisions may very well open us up to failures and learning experiences. But we need to start with, how is God working? What is God doing? How is God speaking? And then let ourselves be fashioned as instruments. So I have great hope that, particularly with Pope Francis as a catalyst, more and more of us will discover what it means to be church as instrument of God's work, instrument of God's mercy, instrument of God's compassion, and put other considerations of rightness and our ideas of justice and our ideas of way the things should be, to be able to at least, if not put them aside, at least hold them lightly, to open our eyes to, okay, how can we together stand before the Lord and say, in a sense, speak, Lord, your servants are listening. I think Francis is, for me, very much a sign of hope. One last image. You know always when I say this is the last, it means second last. But this will be the last quote, and it's on page 11. He's got, let me just kind of read the section, because it has to do with where we look for how God is working, in how people are working, and how people are bringing their own experience to bear in compassion and in mercy. He had and he talks here about frontiers. This is 5th paragraph down. Frontiers are many. By the way, what he's saying is, we need to be on the frontier. We have to get out of the laboratories and into the frontiers. So the distinction is between laboratories and frontiers. As a marvelous, his own experience that saved his life. Frontiers are many. Let's think of the religious sisters living in hospitals. They live on the frontier. I am alive because of one of them. When I went through my lung disease in the hospital, the doctor gave me penicillin and streptomycin in certain doses. The sister who was on duty tripled my doses because she was daringly astute. She knew what to do because she was with ill people all day. The doctor, who was really a good one, lived in his laboratory. The sister lived on the frontier and was in dialogue with it every day. Domesticating the frontier means just talking from remote locations, looking yourself up in a laboratory, locking yourself up in a laboratory. Laboratories are useful, but reflection for us must always start from experience. I think that may be a good place to stop for this evening. I'd like to perhaps end with any prayerful thoughts or reflections that you might have, any insights, any aha experiences that these times of reflection may have inspired you. Is anybody burning to say something, in other words? I'll give you the microphone. Even Bill.
Hi, I had wonderful experience. 1 week ago, I went to a big event to Guadalupe Radio. It's with the Hispanic community, beautiful, big one. All experience I have is everybody smile, everybody give you a blessing, everybody is like very happy. It's a lot of famous fathers, and the radio is amazing, and I feel like very special. Somebody look at me and say, "You look like Chris," something like that. I feel very, very happy, and my daughter, everybody love my daughter, and I feel very, very happy with that kind of experience with beautiful, like here, beautiful community with we have a faith for help people and this leadership be more bigger and have more community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See, what you said was touching the experience of others and being energized by that experience, centered, focused on the Lord. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Monica.
I was intrigued by the focus on the frontier and its connection with experience, because I read this book this summer called The Revenge of Geography by Robert T. Kaplan. And a large part of it talks about the significance of a frontier as being critical towards geography and how we've classically understood it. And I think of how frontiers are normally places, it's the badlands, the hinterlands, the faraway place that helps to delineate something. But what's vivid to me is frontier it's the desert. It's the place where you go to meditate, to think, to have contemplation in the Aristotelian sense. And to me, it's very interesting that the Pope says, no, the frontier is where experience is. And so there's like this intense marriage of these two ideas in the frontier of experience, hands-on experience. You're out in the frontier, but you're also out in the desert, where you are meditating, where you have a contemplativeness, and where you're united with God. And I can see the union of those two ideas just from the very idea of the frontier.
Thank you. One last, and then I have a brief word about where we go from here. because we've had 3 sessions on leadership, and there has been some discussion about how to refocus and where we go from here. But that too will be a work in progress, but I'll speak a little bit more about it. Brenda?
I just want to take a second and say, wearing my nurse shirt, so I'm a nurse, but I just want to say as a nurse listening to Father, put the camera on me, Father Tom here, it's always a pleasure to hear his enthusiasm and the way he shares things, even though he's been around ministry 50 years and I will be 50 soon. The enthusiasm he has and that he shares is just so exciting. And for me as a case manager to keep hearing him say about the Pope and the frontier and how the nurse, did things that the doctor didn't do because we're out in the battlefield. That's what it's about, especially with the media right now and everything that's gone on with the death about depression and suicide. I think we need to look inside ourselves and reach out to others even more than we do currently. And that's what I love about our community and Father Tom, that he always brings that loving spirit to share with everyone. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So where do we take this loving spirit together? I myself have been very challenged by how do we refocus our mission as parish in accord with the vision and mission that Pope Francis presents to us. And because it defies, quite frankly, the theological categories that I have been accustomed to believe, live, and teach. It defies them. It doesn't do away with them, but it says, hey, is that primary? And so much of what we do as church tends to be tending our own household, our own housekeeping, our own need. And there is often something of okay, there's an outreach component, but so much that we do is kind of centered on our lives, our interests, our church. Now, to the extent that there still remains tremendous competition on one hand and sort of ignoring, on the other hand, the life of other parish communities, as well as the life of other ecclesial communities, other churches, including the 2 that are right across the cactus garden. Yeah. We have some contact with them, but there is very little community contact. One of the things I think we need to ask ourselves is, how do we refocus so that we can collaborate to primarily identify our community in terms of mission to make Jesus Christ present in the world? We have to keep ourselves healthy in the life of Jesus Christ. That's for sure. And that's the focus of prayer, liturgy, worship, and even education and formation. But we don't exist for those. We exist to be Christ for the world. And Pope Francis, I think, is saying to us, being for the world doesn't mean straightening them out and telling them to reform and join us. Being for the world means to go out with compassion and heal wounds. And there sure is a lot of woundedness around. Maybe, and this will be my very last point, honest. Maybe, we try to fix too much. And so often in fixing, straightening out, proclaiming the truth, we end up breaking more, alienating more, separating more. Maybe we need to take not fixing, but healing as the model. How do we touch a hurting world with the healing of Jesus Christ, the compassion, the attentiveness of Jesus Christ? I think that's going to really have to be one of the central motivating forces for how we move forward in our living as Good Shepherd heritage.